Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host. Video games are a big deal, and not just for the gamers. The video game industry is bigger than the movie and music industries combined. Let that sink in. Video games increase focus, improve reaction times, help develop strategy, creativity, and a whole lot more. However, that isn't why we play video games. We play because they're a lot of fun. The original PlayStation, PS1, was released by Sony in 1994 and ceased production in 2006. In this duration, it became the first video game platform to sell over 100 million units and ushered in revolution for gaming that continues even today. More than 3,000 PS1 games have been released, of which we look at the top 100 here.
What are you doing? Don't think! Shoot!
Metal Gear Solid, 1998. Metal Gear Solid is at its heart a stealth game. The previous games in this series were 2D. This is the first one that incorporates 3D elements. Special forces of the US government cause a rebellion and forcibly capture a remote island that houses nuclear capabilities. We play the game as the character Solid Snake, a legendary soldier who's forced out of retirement in order to destroy this rebellious nuclear threat and in turn save the world. The player must navigate through the island without being detected using various evasive maneuvers and state-of-the-art gadgets. The overarching theme of this game is genetics and genetic engineering, whereby its use could be both for the side of good and evil. Metal Gear Solid received overwhelmingly positive reviews and it's considered by many to be among the best games of all time on any console. It's credited for being the first game to popularize the entire stealth genre. The beauty of the game, its innovative immersiveness, as well as its high-quality music has been commended by various critics. It was a commercial success and is considered to be not just a game, but a work of art. Vagrant Story, 2000. Vagrant Story is an iconic action role-playing game where the player must explore a city in ruins in the hunt for a mystery man. We must venture into dark dungeons and battle evil creatures using both our combat and strategy skills. There's a special focus on weapons in this game. They can be forged, modified, and even combined. The graphics of this game is cutting edge for its period, and the somber mood is well captured by the music. What's also novel is the ability of the player to switch from first-person to third-person perspective, as well as the absence of interaction with other non-playable characters. Vagrant Story received very positive reviews from players and critics alike. Its complex and comprehensive battle system, its intuitive story, as well as its compelling graphics were universally praised. It was also a commercial success, selling out 100,000 units within just 20 days of its release. Final Fantasy VII, 1997. Final Fantasy VII is the seventh installment in the Final Fantasy video game series and the first to incorporate 3D elements. The player is a part of a resistance organization called the Avalanche that's up against a giant evil corporation, Shinra, which is draining the planet of its energy and using it to control the cosmos. Gameplay includes exploring a world map, traversing natural barriers such as mountains and oceans, as well as engaging in a battle mode with various creatures one may encounter. The underlying themes include overpopulation, environmental disaster, substance abuse, and misogyny. Final Fantasy VII received unanimous acclaim upon its release, with many critics calling it one of the best games ever made. It achieved perfect scores on many platforms in the four categories of graphic, sound, control, and fun. The extensive cutscene usages as well as minigames were also heavily praised. It was a commercial success, being the best-selling video game of 1997. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, 1997. This game takes place 5 years after the ending of the previous game in this series, whereupon Lord Dracula has been defeated by a renowned vampire hunter, Richter Belmont. However, Belmont disappears without a trace and is being controlled by an evil entity named Shaft. Alucard, the son of Dracula, is awakened and must investigate what has happened during his voluntary slumber. This isn't a 3D game, but a 2D side-scrolling game which is non-linear in nature. It also has multiple endings depending upon which choices the player makes on his or her journey. Castlevania Symphony of the Night received wide critical acclaim upon its release, but wasn't initially a commercial success. It grew in popularity over time and ultimately became a cult success. It also destroyed the perception that 2D games were a thing of the past. The smooth animation and the rousing music were commended. It ultimately ascended to the status of a classic, with many platforms including it in their best games of all time lists. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, 2000. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 is a game that was enjoyed by both skaters and non-skaters alike. The player is a professional skateboarder in a fixed-camera third-person view who must execute various tricks as well as complete objectives in order to advance through the game. There are many modes of gameplay, including career mode and multiplayer, wherein the player must perform manual maneuvers and combine several tricks together in order to achieve high scores within a fixed time limit. This game is considered a masterpiece in level design and customization. Apart from Tony Hawk himself, the player can choose among a dozen or so real-life skaters. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was met with universal acclaim and is one of the highest-rated PS1 games ever. It's considered to be the best sporting game of all time by various players and critics. The varied soundtrack and unique gameplay were considered quite advanced for their time. It helped the franchise grow to a level that still new installments of the series are released even today, more than 20 years later. Tekken 3, 1998. Tekken 3 has been called the mother of all fighting games, and for good reason. Initially popular as an arcade game, it was ported to PS1 about a year after its arcade launch. The first two Tekken games were largely two-dimensional, but Tekken 3 adds a third-dimensional element that comes into play mostly while dodging opponent attacks or stepping out of the background. The jumping abilities of the various characters of the game were unreasonable and exaggerated in previous installments of Tekken, but has now been remedied in Tekken 3, and thus the action is much more realistic. The perfect game to play against a friend, wherein one discovers various special moves, as well as combination moves the more one plays the game. The game tests the hardware of the PlayStation and takes it to its limit. The PS1 version of Tekken 3 was a huge hit, much like its arcade version. The game sold over 1 million copies on its first day of release. The martial art of Kung Fu was hugely popularized in popular culture thanks to the widespread access of this game. The music of the game and the background sound became ubiquitous and was dubbed as digital rock. The use of motion capture technology using real martial art fighters was seen as a revolutionary advancement. Ultimately, the game became so successful that there were Tekken 3 tournaments organized around the world. Crash Bandicoot, 1996. This game chronicles the adventures of Crash, who's a bandicoot by species. A bandicoot is a type of rodent, but Crash was no ordinary rodent. He was given human-like powers and abilities by the evil Dr. Neo Cortex. Crash must thwart Dr. Cortex's plans to take over the world as well as rescue his friend Torna in the process. Crash must return to Dr. Cortex's island in order to save Torna. The game expands over 3 islands with 32 levels, including 6 boss fights. There's a nostalgic element to the game as it takes the player back to the golden era of the 90s, right up there with games like Mario and Sonic. The level design as well as graphics are a hallmark of the game and are something that has aged quite well. There's also an alternate ending, which can be triggered after a 100% completion of the game. Crash Bandicoot was well received by gamers and critics. The aesthetic, smoothing animation, use of lighting, as well as sound effects were greatly praised. It won many prestigious awards and became the first non-Japanese game to be awarded top honors in various Japanese platforms and magazines. The game went on to become one of the best-selling PS1 games of all time and led to the creation of various sequels and spin-offs. Spyro the Dragon, 1998. The Dragon Kingdom has been taken over by an evil creature called Nasty Nog, and it's up to the player, as the character Spyro the Dragon, to save the world and free all the other dragons from the crystallizing spell cast by Nasty Nog. This is a 3D platform game in which Spyro has to traverse 6 dragon homeworlds and overcome various obstacles until the final battle with the ultimate boss, Nasty Nog. Spyro the Dragon is a 3D platform game where each level is open-ended and available for exploration. Spyro must free dragons, gather gems and reclaim the dragon's stolen eggs. His main abilities include gliding, attacking headfirst, and breathing fire. Spyro the Dragon has been hailed as one of the best 3D platform games on the PS1. The game's presentation, technical performance, and jazz rock music were lauded by various critics. It's said to have the look and feel of a well-animated movie. The legacy of Spyro has become such that it was chosen to be one of the platform mascots of PS1. Gran Turismo 2, 1999. Gran Turismo 2 is one of the most influential racing games ever made. It has around 650 cars to choose from, 27 tracks, and almost thousands of in-game challenges. There's an arcade mode wherein the player can choose his or her own vehicle, and there's simulation mode, which is more like a career mode where the player has to win trophies, climb up the ranks, and unlock different cars and circuits. The gameplay, physics, and graphics are a major overhaul from the previous game in this series. 2 special areas of focus that have made the game more realistic are taking car damage and the locking up of brakes. This game has directly or indirectly influenced every racing game that exists today, even Need for Speed. Gran Turismo 2 received good reviews and was recommended for both car enthusiasts as well as average players. There were some minor glitches due to the rushed production of the game, but those were ultimately fixed through user patches. All in all, Gran Turismo 2 helped create a brand that continues to this day and rivals other racing franchises like Need for Speed. Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, 1997. Abe's Odyssey is a 2D platform game chronicling the adventures of Abe, who's reluctantly branded as the Chosen One and must liberate his species from tyranny and oppression from another superior race which is looking to harvest Abe's race for meat. The graphical design of this game has been praised both as masterly and bizarre. The game has the player navigating through a deep and dark alien world whilst interacting with other non-playable creatures throughout one's journey. There's a good balance of puzzles as well as action. The unique aspects of this particular game include lack of extra lives, no health bar, as well as the absence of a point scoring system. Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey received mostly positive reviews upon its release. It was praised for its sophisticated gameplay as well as the presence of an advanced AI. A notable aspect of the game is its difficulty. It's much more difficult than the average game of this genre. Although that could be frustrating sometimes, the ultimate payoff in the end was definitely worth it. Siphon Filter, 1999. Siphon Filter is a stealth game that pits two US Special Forces against the forces of German international terrorism who have stolen a top-secret virus. It's by default from the third-person perspective, but can shift to first-person perspective when using certain weapons. They traverse across America and Russia to recover and understand the superweapon Siphon Filter, which in the wrong hands could destroy the world. There's a balance of stealth and action levels. Some of the latter are quite difficult in nature. The music is of high quality and changes depending upon the situation the player finds him or herself in. The cutscenes have been especially popular for their movie-like feel. Siphon Filter released to almost universal acclaim. The game's attention to detail and graphics were praised and led to the formation of a new hybrid stealth action genre. The technical texturing and rendering capabilities of the game were also positively highlighted. The game sold almost 1 million copies, and based on that, further sequels were commissioned. Crash Team Racing, 1999. Crash Team Racing is a spin-off from the legendary Crash Bandicoot series. Players can control characters from the series like Crash, Dr. Cortex, and others while trying to win races against the evil character Nitrous Oxide to save the world from doom. This game is at its heart a kart racing game with various racing modes like arcade, adventure, battle, etc. Adventure mode is like career mode, wherein the player must defeat different bosses on 16 different tracks before finally facing off against Nitrous Oxide. There's also a time limit mode to compete for recording the fastest lap, as well as a multiplayer mode that allows up to 4 players to fight customized battles. Crash Team Racing opened to generally favorable reviews. Many people compared it to the ultra-successful Mario Kart series. The graphics and ease of control were heavily praised, but the music was criticized by some. Overall, the game sold over 2 million units and led to the development of a sequel. Resident Evil 2, 1998. Resident Evil 2 is a horror survival game wherein the two protagonists must escape a city whose inhabitants have been turned into bloodthirsty zombies. The two main modes of gameplay are combat and puzzle solving. The new characters and weapons, better graphics and immersive narrative made this game a huge improvement over its predecessor. The two different characters encounter altogether different scenarios, and the choice of which character to play affects the storyline and how the game proceeds. Thus, there are many timelines in which the game can progress. The theme of the music is desperation, which captures the horror survival atmosphere of the game very well. Resident Evil 2 received great critical acclaim upon release. The characterization of the zombies was praised. The eerie atmosphere, well-written dialogue and replayability of the game were positively pointed out. The cutscenes and animation were considered masterpieces. The only major point of criticism was the complicated weapons and inventory system, but that was an aspect that players got used to the more they played. The game was a huge commercial success, selling more than 5 million copies in its original form for the PS1. Many critics consider it to be one of the best console games of all time, and it's become the influence for various future games. A remake of the game was released in 2019, which also became quite successful. The Legend of Dragoon, 1999. The Legend of Dragoon is a role-playing fantasy game wherein the protagonist traverses through a magical world full of dragons, giants, and other fantastical creatures in his quest to save the world. Unlike most games, this uses a combination of real-time and turn-based commands. The Dragoon form of a player that can be activated gives the player a changed appearance as well as special dragon-like abilities like flying and increased attack. The battle mechanics and interface are cleverly built, requiring a lot of tactics. There are also magical abilities that can be used but only in Dragoon form. The visuals are the strongest part of this game, with polygonal pre-rendering being a salient feature. The controls are also smooth, allowing players to move in 8 directions. The Legend of Dragoon received good as well as mixed reviews. The graphics, the animation and the CG were praised. It's been compared to the Final Fantasy series. The game was a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies. Many spin-offs resulted from it, like a separate soundtrack album, a novel, and even a manga. There are also petitions by various gamers for a modern remake of this historical masterpiece. Tomb Raider 2, 1997. Tomb Raider 2 chronicles the journey of Lara Croft as she's in search of a mythical dagger and has to find it before it falls into the wrong hands. This dagger apparently grants its owner the ability to turn into a dragon. Lara Croft reaches the Great Wall of China and has to solve various puzzles and avoid numerous traps while fighting a variety of creatures, including dinosaurs, also using various vehicles in the process. This journey takes Croft across China, Venice, Tibet, and England for what makes a very exciting adventure to play and watch. Over its predecessor, Tomb Raider offers newer weapons, vehicles, extra moves, the ability to climb walls, perform mid-air rolls, amongst other features. Tomb Raider 2 received mostly positive reviews. The gameplay aspects were praised, but the graphics were considered okay but not too huge of a leap from the previous installment. Overall, its variety of challenges and user experience was celebrated by gamers. The game was a huge commercial success, selling around 7 million copies for the PS1. It was also made into a successful movie with Angelina Jolie starring as Lara Croft. More games in the Tomb Raider series were also released in the coming years and were successful. Medal of Honor Underground 2000. Medal of Honor Underground is the quintessential first-person shooter game whose story was partially developed by the legendary director Steven Spielberg. The game is set during the 1940s when France was occupied by Nazi Germany. The level design is solid and covers various parts of Europe like Greece, Germany and France, as well as parts of Africa. There are 7 distinct missions and about a dozen historical weapons. The enemy artificial intelligence is quite adaptive and can range from attacking on bikes to well-armored tanks. Medal of Honor Underground for the PS1 received mostly favorable reviews. The action and detail-packed scenarios as well as the immersive soundtrack were widely praised. The soundtrack was also nominated for a BAFTA award. The success of this game led to the development of further titles, and progressively the Medal of Honor franchise became a worthy rival of the extremely popular Call of Duty series. Driver 1999. Driver is an action driving game. The player is a former racer and current police officer who's working undercover. He has to impress gang members with his driving skills to be appointed as the driver of a mafia group which is planning to assassinate the President of the United States. The player's mission is to prevent that from happening. The game takes place over 4 cities: Miami, New York, San Francisco, and LA. The elements of stunt jumping as well as encounters with the cops are a hallmark of this game. The driving, while realistic, also has some fun or exaggerated arcade influences to it. This game and franchise has often been favorably compared with the Grand Theft Auto series. Driver was a huge commercial hit, selling over 4 million units. Critics and gamers dubbed it comprehensive and deep, and compared it to the Gran Turismo series. This game won the Game Critics Award for Best Racing Game in 1999. The car handling and in-game physics were widely praised and considered the best at the time. The game's popularity and success led to the development and release of multiple sequels. Chrono Cross 1999. Chrono Cross is the second installment in the very popular Chrono series, set in the same world as its predecessor Chrono Trigger. This game follows the journey of a young boy, Serge, within the theme of interlinked multiverses, i.e. parallel timelines. This game talks about parallel universes before it was cool. The storyline is full of twists and quite unpredictable. It culminates into multiple outcomes and endings depending upon the choices that the player makes. The world is beautifully designed and the background music is extremely suited to the ambiance as well as immersive. The battle mechanics and sequences are markedly and refreshingly different from standard turn-based games. This game is highly nostalgic for many gamers. Chrono Cross was a big hit and won many awards. Owing to this success, a remastered edition was released after 23 years in 2022. There have been many fan petitions for a sequel, but as of now, there has been no concrete plan to do so. The possible sequel regularly appears on lists such as Top 10 Sequels in Demand. Street Fighter Alpha 3, 1998. Street Fighter Alpha 3 is a 2D fighting game considered, along with Tekken 3, to be the best and most addictive fighting game on the PS1. This game does away with the fighting styles of the previous installment and introduces completely new modes of play, as well as a plethora of new characters. It also introduces a new mechanic for blocking attacks as well. The game introduces various modes of play: World Tour, Arcade, Versus, Training, and Entry modes. The counter-attack system and the combination move mechanics are quite interesting and fun to play with. The extremely detailed animation is smooth and immersive. This helps the game be compared to even the best 3D fighter games. The music is good, but what is especially praiseworthy are the various attack and defense sounds that happen when the player chooses a particular move. Street Fighter Alpha 3 was a big commercial success in Japan and in America. The original PS1 version has sold over 1 million units. It's still ranked among the best and most innovative fighting games of all time on any console. Thanks to its success, the Street Fighter series has cemented its place in pop culture. Parappa the Rapper, 1996. This is a unique rhythm-based video game developed by famed music producer Masaya Matsuura that involved interesting visual elements in addition to the theme of the game, which was rap music. Players had to consistently stay on beat in order to get good rankings, while missing beats would fetch them bad rankings. This game was the first of its kind and led to the creation of a new genre. Parappa the Rapper received universal acclaim from critics and players. The tunes and melodies were very catchy and entertained players and critics alike. The 2D elements of the visuals against a 3D backdrop created an interesting visual component. The game became so popular in Japan that Sony decided to forego its policy of not releasing 2D games in America and ultimately published an English version. The game sold around 2 million copies worldwide and led to the creation of a sequel as well as some spin-offs. Legacy of Kane, Soul Reaver, 2000. Legacy of Kane, Soul Reaver is the story of a vampire turned into a ghost, Raziel, who seeks revenge from the one who was killed by the titular character, Kane. The game is a balance of combat and puzzles. It takes place across 2 realms, the material and the spectral. The spectral realm allows Raziel to do certain things and make certain moves that would otherwise be impossible in the material realm. The atmosphere and visual styles have been described as dark and gothic, and background music has been dubbed temperamental. The voice acting, narration and storyline have been greatly praised. Legacy of Kane, Soul Reaver was quite successful upon its release. Critics noted the difficulty of puzzles and appealed to seasoned gamers. The non-linearity of the game was both praised and criticized. One noticeably lacking feature was that of a well-defined map, which confused some players. This game has always been a fan favorite and a classic. There have been many calls to produce a remastered version or remake, but so far no plans have been announced. Final Fantasy IX, 2000. Final Fantasy is a role-playing game and the 9th title in the Final Fantasy series. The story takes place in a fictional war-torn world where the player is tasked to kidnap a princess in order to defeat a queen who started the war. The player has to explore and navigate through an open sandbox world as well as interact with various non-playable characters. The battles happen through a turn-based system which gives the player control of up to 8 characters. The players gain experience points by different enemies and also pick up various weapons, as well as magical abilities. The game also has a trance mode wherein players gain special abilities only for the duration of the trance. Final Fantasy IX was very successful. Final Fantasy X and XI were announced alongside it, with the latter having an online component. Final Fantasy IX is one of the most critically acclaimed games in the Final Fantasy series. Critics praised the characters, the combat system as well as the graphics. The PS1 version of the game sold over 5.5 million copies. Medal of Honor, 1999. The concept of the original game Medal of Honor was the brainchild of the legendary movie director Steven Spielberg, who became very interested in the subject after directing the World War II film Saving Private Ryan. The game is set toward the end of World War II, wherein the player must defeat Nazi forces and rescue allies. There's also a deathmatch mode where players can square off each other on different numbers of maps. The level design was very solid, as was the tension and excitement in the atmosphere before and during the battles. The architecture of buildings was very realistic. The use of light and shadow was also very innovative. The effect and sound of weapons, especially machine guns, was a salient feature of this game. The enemy artificial intelligence was also very adaptive and difficult to defeat at times. Medal of Honor was extremely successful. It won the IGN Editor's Choice Award in 1999. Critics praised its believable realism and attention to detail. It's credited, along with Call of Duty, for making first-person war shooters popular. It was also one of the first instances which proved that difficult and serious topics could be tackled by video games. Mega Man Legends, 1997. Mega Man Legends is unlike other conventional Mega Man titles like Mega Man X because of the fact that it takes place in a 3D sandbox environment. Originally, Mega Man games used to be platform-type games, but this one is like an action-adventure role-playing game. The essential formula for the previous games was simple. Fight 8 bosses, one after another, gain special abilities and weapons, and finally square off against a mega boss. This game breaks that tradition and lets you run around in an open world, do side quests, interact with non-playable characters, and look out for different upgrades. Mega Man Legends is set in a world covered by oceans, and you have to find a legendary treasure before the pirates do. The camera control is quite good, which makes aiming and firing a fun and easy task. The music is sweet, while the graphics are colourful. Overall, it's quite a pleasant and cheerful game in contrast to some previous dark Mega Man games. Mega Man Legends received moderately positive responses from critics and players alike. The change from 2D to 3D was well received. The story, characters and detailing were praised and considered to be among the best in the Mega Man franchise. Although popular, the game didn't sell as much as expected, which its creator attributed to a lack of understanding and popularity of 3D sandbox games. However, its popularity led to the development of further sequels. Kanoa, Door to Phantomile, 1997. Kanoa, Door to Phantomile is what is popularly called a 2.5D game. The background is in 3D, but the player moves along a 2D path. It's essentially a platform-type side-scrolling game where the player as Kanoa has to rescue the fictional world of Phantomile from the hands of an evil spirit. This isn't like the typical side-scroller where you jump on or over enemies. Here you can throw enemies in various directions, either towards other enemies or downward to enable you to jump higher. The game also makes you notice objects and enemies in the third dimension, and you can throw projectiles at them. The visuals of Kanoa, daughter Phantomile, are amazing, as are the cutscenes. Some reviews have called the characters overly cute or cartoonish, but that's a subjective preference. The flow of the game is smooth, the enemies are interesting, and the animation is top-notch. The one criticism was that the game was too short in length. Kanoa won the Best Character Award at the prestigious 1997 Japan Game Awards. The success of the game led to the development of several sequels as late as 2022. R4 Ridge Racer Type 4, 1998. R4 Ridge Racer Type 4 is an arcade racing game and one of the first to establish this genre. There are two basic modes of handling the car, drift and grip. Drift allows you to oversteer and power slide through the corners, while grip is based on traction and control. Players must choose one out of 4 teams and compete on various tracks across the world in order to progress further and unlock more cars, of which there are 321. There's also a time attack mode where the player must set the fastest time possible, and there's a versus mode where there's a split screen competition between 2 players. The graphics are very good and quite smooth. The soundtrack is also quite pleasant and the car handling is very intuitive. The game was a critical and commercial success in both Japan and the USA, selling over 1 million copies. The success of R4 Ridge Racer Type 4 further solidified the position of the Ridge Racer franchise and led to many sequels. The Ridge Racer series thus became rivals of the Need for Speed as well as Gran Turismo franchises. Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace, 1999. Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace is an action-adventure game that's based on the very successful movie of the same name. Players can control legendary characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, Queen Amidala, and Captain Panaka. There are weapons like blasters, lightsabers, explosives, and even weaponized proton launchers depending upon which character the player is playing as. There's also the metaphorical use of the Force that's available. The defense mechanism has been improved from previous games. It's now possible to deflect laser bolts off one's own lightsabers and even redirect them at enemies. The game is a balance of combat, both melee and ranged, as well as puzzle solving. It's an open world where players can explore and interact with non-playable characters for side missions and clues for further progress. Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace opened to mostly positive and some mixed reviews. Both gamers and critics enjoyed the faithful adaptation to the movie. The level of nostalgia attached to this game is tremendous. The game is also quite long in duration and thus keeps the player engaged. Many have called this game way ahead of its time. The popularity of the game led to many sequels, the first of which was Episode 2. Twisted Metal 2, 1996. Twisted Metal 2 is an action combat game involving vehicles. It's of the demolition derby genre, wherein vehicles ram into each other or use weapons in order to intentionally inflict damage. Players have to choose a map, a car, and an opponent. Thus, the battle ensues until one car is beyond repair. There are various weapons across the game that can be picked up. The maps include a variety of places such as New York, Moscow, Hong Kong, Paris, Antarctica, the Amazon rainforest, as well as a few others. There are also special backgrounds designed for multiplayer combat. There's also a 2-player dual head-to-head mode. Twisted Metal 2 was both a critical and commercial success. The game sold well over 2 million copies worldwide. The variety of vehicles, weapons, and maps were praised. The improvements in texture sharpness as well as frame rate were also commended. The success of the game led to many sequels and a spin-off. There have been calls and petitions by fans for a remastered version of the game. Final Fantasy VIII, 1999. Final Fantasy VIII is the 8th installment in the hugely popular Final Fantasy series. It's a role-playing game set in a fantasy sci-fi world. The game follows a group of young warriors who are in the quest of defeating an evil sorceress. Like its predecessor, the game makes use of 3D modeling and pre-rendered maps. The game is not all action, as there's an element of a love story involving the main characters. There's use of high polygon models, and the character animation and graphics are quite smooth. The soundtrack also enhances the effects of in-game battles and cutscenes. There's a major change in the gameplay mechanism. The magic system is completely different from one in previous Final Fantasy games. There's neither magical leveling up nor any magic points. Players have to extract different spells from different characters. The world is open-ended and a lot of fun can be had in exploration and interaction. Final Fantasy VIII received critical acclaim and commercial success. The movie-like cutscenes were praised and the game was commended for being very visually pleasing. The battle system was said to be complicated but worthwhile, as players could choose among a wide range of techniques and customizations. The game received various awards for Game of the Year. It sold almost 10 million copies across all platforms. Einhander, 1997. Einhander is a side-scrolling shooter game that's based on stories from Greek mythology. The game is set in a fictional future where there's a war among the Earth's and Moon's colonies. The player is among the warriors who are attacking Earth for its natural resources. The game is in 2.5D. The background is in 3D, but the movement gameplay is linear, or 2D. The player is equipped with a machine gun as well as a robotic arm that can pick up enemy weapons, which include lightsabers, missile launchers, and cannons, amongst others. Einhander was met with extremely positive reviews. The degree of detail in all the levels and the intricacy of spacecrafts and weapons were praised. The difficulty of the boss levels was also commended. The techno soundtrack of the game was well liked. The background sound effects of explosions and destruction were very realistic. Whatever be the skill of the player, the game is always able to provide a challenge. Wipeout 2097, 1996. Wipeout 2097 is a futuristic racing game and the second installment in the very successful Wipeout series. This game is set around 40 years after its predecessor and promises to be much quicker and more reckless. The spacecrafts are tremendously fast in a straight line, and it's the tight cornering using air brakes that requires real skill. One notable difference from its predecessor is that the player is allowed to damage competing spacecrafts using various weapons. The most powerful weapon among these is something called the Quake Disruptor, which became so popular that it's been included in every subsequent game. There's the introduction of a two-player mode enabling players to compete on the same track. The soundtrack is in tune with the gameplay, and also consists of licensed music from several artists. Several tactical trade-off elements were added, like being able to repair your ship in the pits but losing valuable time in the process. Wipeout 2097 was both a critical and commercial success. Critics praised the all-round improvement from its predecessor in terms of graphics, music, smoothness of animation, and frame rate. The artificial intelligence controlling the other races was deemed to be significantly better. It won various awards from its eclectic soundtrack. Although other Wipeout games have had remasters, a remake of this one on a modern console is quite in demand from gamers. Bushido Blade, 1997. Bushido Blade is a 3D combat game mainly consisting of head-to-head battles between opponents from a third-person perspective. There are no health points or special ability meters. Some fights can be won with a single hit. There's a special mechanism called Body Damage System that allows players to damage areas one by one on an accumulative basis. This allows players to slow down their opponent's attacking and dodging speeds. Shots to the arms or legs are less deadly, while shots to the head or clean across the torso are absolutely fatal. There are 6 playable characters as well as 8 weapons that can be equipped. This includes a wide variety from Japanese katanas and European longswords to sledgehammers. The action takes place in an open arena where players can run, jump, and climb. There are various modes of play apart from the single-player story mode. These include a training mode, a versus mode where the player battles 100 ninjas, and a first-person point-of-view mode. Bushido Blade was very popular among critics as well as players and sold quite well. The innovative combat system received a lot of praise. The ability to run around and choose the arena of combat was also highlighted positively. The highly detailed graphics as well as the ability to incrementally damage one's opponent was seen as realistic. There have been many calls for an HD remake. 1997. 1 is a unique game wherein the player wakes up with no prior memory and one of his arms having turned into a gun. The player has to flee from police and army forces that are out to kill him. The mission of the game is to figure out who the player is, as there's little clue except for the presence of a barcode on his neck. There's no leveling up, but there is a rage meter that fills up on each kill and grants the player special abilities. The player has to defeat 6 bosses across 6 levels, using objects and settings from the surroundings rather than by direct combat. 1 received polarizing reviews. Some people loved the game while others despised it. The graphics, level design, and movie-like feel were praised. The gameplay and camera angles were criticized to a certain extent. The visuals of explosions and use of light and shadow were also praised. Xeno Gears, 1998. Xeno Gears is a 3D role-playing game where the player can control special humanoid robots known as gears. The story follows the protagonist as he discovers himself and the world around him, fighting against an all-powerful ruler. The game incorporates several elements of the philosophy of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Friedrich Nietzsche, as well as a lot of religious symbolism. The characters fight with martial arts as well as magical abilities. There are special attacks called elemental death blows. In addition, there are battles using the robots, i.e. gears. The music has a strong Irish Celtic influence. Xeno Gears achieved both critical acclaim and commercial success. Critics pointed out that it was unlike any other role-playing game at the time. The storyline was said to be complex and rich, while character development was also praised. The battle mechanism, especially while using gears, was highly rated. The music was also praised to nicely suit the game's ambiance. There was speculation of a direct sequel or prequel, but nothing has happened yet. The Xenosaga series was released that's similar but not directly related. Time Crisis, 1995. Time Crisis is an arcade shooter game wherein the player could use a simulated hardware gun and shoot while pointing at the screen. The unique feature of this game included a button using which a player could take cover and reload. The story follows a secret agent trying to rescue the kidnapped daughter of the president from the hands of an autocratic tyrant. There are 3 levels at the end of which are boss battles, and the player has a limited amount of time to kill all the enemies on the screen. The player must take a risky and fast strategy, and take cover only when absolutely essential in order to complete the mission on time. Time Crisis was a commercial success and well liked by critics as well. It was the most successful gun arcade game of its time. The unique cover and reload system brought the game a lot of acclaim. There were a lot of comparisons with its rival Virtua Cop 2, but Time Crisis was superior in the end because of its innovation. The success of the game led to many sequels. SpiderMan, 2000. SpiderMan is an action-adventure game based on the Marvel comic superhero. The story follows Spider-Man as he's framed by Dr. Octopus and Carnage, wherein he must prove his innocence as well as save the city from evil forces. The player controls Spider-Man and can use his various abilities to navigate the environment, like swinging from webs, super strength, being able to crawl on walls and buildings, etc. The player meets various Spider-Man villains at the end of levels in the form of bosses like Scorpion, Mysterio, Rhino, Venom, etc. And he's also aided in his mission by many allies like Black Cat, Daredevil, Human Torch, the Punisher, and others. There are many temporary power-ups as well as improvements on normal web shooting available across the game. Spider-Man received positive reviews from critics and players alike. It's been called arguably among the best superhero game of all time on any console. The theme of the game, as well as its ambiance, feels like a comic book, as many players have expressed. The game spawned 3 sequels across various platforms. Some of the developers of the game, as well as fans, have expressed a desire for a modern remastered version. Parasite Eve, 1998. Parasite Eve is a survival horror action role-playing game that serves as a sequel to the novel of the same name. It chronicles the story of a New York woman police officer, Aya, as she tries to save the human race from the clutches of a mysterious woman named Eve, who's responsible for many accidents and explosions across the city. There are many genetically mutated monsters along the way, and Aya must look for and use various weapons as well as her hidden mitochondrial powers, which is based on a theme from the original book. This game was built through collaboration between American and Japanese teams, which was unusual at the time. Parasite Eve received quite favorable reviews upon its release. The sophisticated theme and graphics of the game were heavily praised. The lack of voice acting and the linearity and plot were described as the few drawbacks of the game. The depth of the gameplay, as well as various discoverable elements in the game, was widely appreciated. The game was so popular that it spawned 2 sequels as well as a manga. Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire, 1995. Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire is a linear shooting game where the player has no control of the predetermined path but can aim, shoot, and dodge according to their liking. The game incorporated live action scenes shot against a blue screen and then 3D rendered them in the video game environment. There are 15 levels in the game, and the story isn't based on any part in the movies, thus making them non-canonical. The player, Rookie 1, has access to pilot various new command ships throughout the game, like the Millennium Falcon. Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire was a commercial success, although the critics were divided in their opinion. The graphics as well as the video quality were unanimously praised. The points of contention were the forced linearity of the game as well as the limited gameplay. This game, however, was popular among gamers because of its nostalgic appeal. The non-canonical story was liked by some and disliked by others. Some have called this more of an interactive movie than a full-fledged game. Spyro 2: Riptos Rage, 1999. Spyro 2: Riptos Rage is a platform-type game and the second installment in the very successful and popular Spyro franchise. Spyro the Dragon and his sidekick Sparx, the Dragonfly, must save the world from the wrath of Ripto, a small, bad-tempered dinosaur-like wizard. The playable world is divided into 3 realms: the Summer Forest, the Autumn Plains, and the Winter Tundra. Spyro and Sparx must travel across each realm while completing quests and collecting gems, orbs, and talismans, ultimately defeating Ripto by drowning him in his own creation of a lava lake. Spyro 2: Riptos Rage received quite favorable reviews from critics and players. The cute cartoon-like graphics were compared to the extremely popular Pokemon series. The controls are smooth and the camera angles don't get in the way of this extremely fun game. Even players who haven't played the original Spyro will almost certainly like this game. The difficulty is challenging enough to keep playing and want to further advance through the story. A remastering of the game was released in 2018. Jumping Flash, 1995. Jumping Flash is a platform-type video game played from a first-person perspective. It holds the Guinness Book record for being the first platform-type game in true 3D. It was initially built as a prototype to showcase what was possible using the hardware of the PlayStation console. The game follows the story of Robert, a robotic rabbit, who is tasked with retrieving jet pods that have been scattered across the world by an evil mad scientist. Each of the 18 levels has a time limit, and there are 7 boss battles in total. The level design is solid and encompasses deserts, theme parks, and mountains, among others. Jumping Flash received quite positive reviews upon release and was described as genre-pushing. Critics praised it for having a good balance of action and tactical gameplay. The graphics were innovative and the atmosphere was exciting. The game was described by many to have been completely singular and hypnotic. There was unanimous agreement that this game had its unique place in video game history. The success of the game led to a sequel and a spin-off. Star Wars Episode I: Jedi Power Battles, 2000. This game is set during the timeline of the Star Wars movie The Phantom Menace. It's a combat platform-type game. The game follows from the perspective of one of the 5 Jedi from Episode I, namely Kenobi, Jin, Windu, Galia, and Kun. The primary weapon is a lightsaber which can be used both to attack as well as deflect. There are special weapons available, as is the use of the Force. There are also times where the player can pilot a spacecraft. There's also a cooperative mode where the story campaign can be played simultaneously by 2 players. The PlayStation version of Star Wars Episode I: Jedi Power Battles received mixed to moderate reviews, while it fared on other platforms such as the Sega Dreamcast. The game's high difficulty drew both praise as well as criticism. The cooperative mode was, however, universally praised and would influence future games to be about teamwork and cooperation. Like most Star Wars games, this was a highly nostalgic game and did well commercially. Valyrians, 1999. Valyrians is a survival horror game that explores the abilities and limits of the human psyche. The protagonist is a young boy, Rion, who has psychic powers and is unable to remember his original identity. Rion has several psychic powers, including telepathy and drug-induced offensive powers. Rion has to save humanity by defeating a self-replicating artificial intelligence and its genetically enhanced creations. There's no weapon-based combat. All the fighting is psychokinetic. There's a special meter which, when full, throws Rion into an uncontrolled rage that instantly kills any non-boss enemy, but this state is harmful for Rion himself if he stays in it for too long. The game was successful and received mixed reviews. The pre-rendered 3D graphics as well as the dark, twisted plot was praised. The cutscenes were called movie-like. The linearity in plot and difficult controls were criticized, but the overall intention of the game was praised and constituted something different in the survival horror genre. The success of the game spawned a sequel called Valyrians: Ash in 2002. Bishi Bashi Special, 1998. Bishi Bashi Special is a collection of 85 competitive mini-games that can be played with up to 8 players. There are many Bishi Bashi titles, but Bishi Bashi Special is the only one to be released outside of Japan. The games are quite surreal and even bizarre. Graphics are loud and cartoon-like. This game is a very good example of how graphics are not always the most important aspect of gaming. Most of the minigames require something outrageous to be performed. Some of the minigames include knocking down bowling pins with cars, shooting men out of a cannon into a statue, a bride throwing wedding cake down the aisle, cavemen juggling and eating different coloured balls, among a wide and bizarre variety of others. The Bishi Bashi series has done extremely well in Japan, and the Bishi Bashi Special, which was released to America and Europe, did quite well as well. This has been described as a perfect party game to play with one's friends. The success of this game has led to various mobile, PlayStation and arcade sequels to be released. Crash Bandicoot 3: Warped, 1998. Crash Bandicoot 3: Warped is the 3rd installment in the greatly successful Crash Bandicoot series. The protagonists Crash and Coco Bandicoot must collect 25 crystals scattered across time before the evil Dr. Neo Cortex and his allies do so. There's a time-traveling device called the Time Twisting Machine which has different chambers containing various levels. At the end of the game, there's a final boss battle at the core of the machine with Dr. Cortex and his allies, after which the machine implodes and takes the enemies to an ancient prehistoric past. But Crash and Coco manage to escape just in time. Crash Bandicoot 3: Warped was met with great positive feedback by both critics and gamers. The graphics, texture and animations were widely praised and considered at the limiting edge of PS1 hardware. The gameplay was considered addictive. The soundtrack, audio effects and voice acting were praised for their diversity and originality. The game sold around 6 million copies, making it one of the best-selling PS1 games of all time. It was also the first non-Japanese game to sell over 1 million copies in Japan. The popularity of the game spawned various sequels and a remastered version was released in 2017. Colony Wars, 1997. Colony Wars is a space combat simulation type video game. It takes place at a time when the Earth and solar system are out of natural resources and various colonies have been set up in multiple planets across the universe. These colonies are, however, unsatisfied at existing only to service Earth and thus band together and form a league to revolt against and seek independence from the greedy ruler of Earth. The player is a League fighter pilot who must fly different ships and succeed at around 70 missions to ensure independence of the League from the greedy and evil clutches of the Earthlings. The player's performances in each of these missions create the narrative for the plot, and there are as many as 5 different endings. Colony Wars received both critical acclaim and commercial success. The game's graphics were said to be light years ahead of the competition and constituted one of the best graphics across all PS1 games. The multiple branches of the storyline as well as different endings were considered very innovative. The narration and sound effects were considered peak for the time. It was a unanimous feeling that the game felt like an epic space battle. The popularity and success of the game gave rise to 2 sequels. Resident Evil, 1996. Resident Evil is a survival horror game where the player is a member of a special task force who must escape a mysterious mansion infested with zombies and other mutated creatures. The player must also uncover various clues that tell the story about the mysterious nature of this mansion. The game has multiple endings depending upon which course of action the player takes. There's a strong emphasis on the survival aspect, as there are limits to everything including ammunition as well as save games. Thus, the player is forced to strategize and play conservatively. There are various creatures apart from zombies, like zombified dogs, spiders, crows, anthropomorphic reptiles, among many others. The player's first encounter with a zombie is considered one of the most iconic video game moments of all time. Resident Evil was critically acclaimed and extremely successful commercially. The gameplay was gripping and addictive. The story and plot were genuinely scary and felt like a horror movie. The chilling music also added well to the element of gameplay. This game is widely credited in repopularizing zombies in pop culture. It sold over 5 million copies across all PlayStation consoles. Many sequels, movies and TV series were created as inspiration from this iconic game. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, 1999. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is a survival horror game and the 3rd installment in the incredibly popular Resident Evil series. The protagonist, former elite agent Jill Valentine, must escape a city that's been afflicted with a virus known as the Tyrant virus. This highly contagious virus would make its host much stronger physically and would let him or her remain alive despite multiple organ failure and even severe brain damage. This game also introduces the character of Nemesis, a monster inspired from the series The Terminator, who will chase the player from time to time and track her using weapons and intelligence. There are multiple endings to the game depending upon the player's choices and also on the particular choice of whether to face or run away from Nemesis at multiple points during the game. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis met with universal acclaim. It was dubbed a masterpiece and a classic. The new and updated movement scheme, including dodging attacks, was widely praised. The level of difficulty was felt to have increased, as did the sheer number of zombies and enemies one had to face. The puzzles were fun to solve and mostly logical. The pre-rendered backgrounds were exquisitely detailed. The sound effects were spooky and relevant. It led to many sequels and was the direct inspiration for the 2004 movie Resident Evil Apocalypse. Dino Crisis, 1999. Dino Crisis is a survival horror, panic horror video game and the first in the Dino Crisis series. It was developed by the same team as the Resident Evil series and shares many similarities with those games. Instead of zombies, however, there are dinosaurs, which are fast, intelligent, and destructive. There are different species of dinosaurs, including Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor, among half a dozen others. Unlike the pre-rendered engine in Resident Evil, Dino Crisis uses a real-time engine to create better characterization and dramatization. This brought the limiting edge of what was possible with PS1 hardware. The movement and habits of dinosaurs were based on movies like Jurassic Park and real-time movements of carnivorous creatures that are not afraid of humans like lions and tigers. Dino Crisis met with positive response from critics and gamers. There was inevitable comparison with the Resident Evil series, but reviewers agreed that this game brought forth a different formula for success. The strategic and action elements of the game were praised in terms of intensity and playability. The quick pace of the real-time engine's gameplay was also praised. It sold around 2.5 million copies on PS1 and led to the development of many sequels. Madden NFL 2001. Madden NFL 2001 is a game about American football. It's been dubbed the most technical and complete video game representation of American football at the time. The game has more customizable features than its predecessors, including Create a Team and Create a Player. There are about 60 stadiums and 40 teams, including fictional ones. The control is smooth and uses a momentum-based physics engine that feels extremely realistic. The visuals and the details have been described as a masterpiece for the time. The faces of the individual players and officials are incredibly realistic. The animation of the players and game is quite fluid. The commentary by John Madden doesn't fail to impress, as do the other game-related sound effects. Madden NFL 2001 received great reviews from players and critics. The gameplay and graphics were especially praised. Many critics said that this game was one of the good reasons to upgrade to a PS2. This became a seminal benchmark game to which all future sports games are compared. The Madden NFL series remains successful and popular to this very day, with the latest iteration being released in 2022. Pepsi Man, 1999. Pepsi Man was an action video game in Japan intended as an advertisement for the soda brand Pepsi. The player plays the game as Pepsi Man, who's a superhero and provides hydration for people in need. For example, an army man in the middle of a desert. Pepsi Man has to avoid obstacles and keep running in order to fulfill his goal. The game takes place in New York, San Francisco, and Texas, while the last level takes place in the fictional Pepsi City. The game is interspersed by the scene of an American drinking Pepsi while watching the game Pepsi Man. Although intended as just an advertisement, this simple game earned some good reviews from critics and players. It wasn't a big commercial success, but did well according to its intended purpose. The gameplay was simplistic and fun, and the portrayal of America and Americans was considered quite amusing. This game, if not anything else, would be able to sharpen people's reflexes. WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role, 2000. WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role is a professional wrestling video game that covers the WWE, changed from WWF, universe. It's the second game in the Smackdown series. The story season mode of this game includes many more kayfabe storylines and competition than its predecessor. There's a multiplayer option, and up to 4 gamers can play per season. The new type of matches include Hell in a Cell, ladder matches, Iron Man matches, and table matches. The number of wrestlers to play with has increased by a lot from its predecessors, and there are various unlockable characters as well. The Create a Superstar mode is highly customizable when compared to its predecessors. WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role met with very positive reviews upon its release. This is one of the highest rated wrestling games of all time. The game also won various sporting game awards. It also received commercial success, becoming the highest selling combat sports game on the PS1, selling over 3 million copies. The success and popularity of the game led to a sequel being released in 2001. Grandia, 1999. Grandia is a role-playing game set in a fictional fantasy world where a young boy, Justin, is on a journey to discover the secrets of an ancient civilization. This journey also attracts the attention of evil forces in the universe. The backdrop of the Grandia universe is in 3D, while the characters are two-dimensional. The camera angle is from a third-person perspective and is amenable to rotation. There are different classes of spells and weapons that the player learns and earns throughout the story as he/she fights various types of monsters. Grandia was met with extremely positive reviews upon release. The battle system was thoroughly praised because, unlike most role-playing games, it wasn't turn-based, and characters could attack and defend at the same time. The character design and audio quality were both considered extremely detailed. The game was favorably compared to the extremely popular Final Fantasy series. The success of the game led to many sequels as well as a remastered remake, which was released in 2019. Spyro, Year of the Dragon, 2000. Spyro, Year of the Dragon is a platform-type game and is the third installment in the very successful Spyro series. The game follows Spyro the Dragon from a third-person perspective as he, along with his dragonfly sidekick Sparx, tries to recover dragon eggs that have been stolen. Spyro and Sparx traverse through 36 different worlds full of new stories, characters, and minigames. For the first time, there are other characters that are playable other than Spyro. The game is called Year of the Dragon according to the Chinese zodiac, in which the release year, 2000, represents the Year of the Dragon. Spyro, Year of the Dragon met with universal acclaim upon its release. The controls and level design were unanimously praised. The music drew divisive reactions, but critics agreed that it was wholesome and kept in line with the mood of the game. Camera angles were the only point of criticism. The game was a commercial success, selling over 3 million copies. It led to the development of various sequels as well as an HD remastered version in 2018. Tenchu 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins, 2000. Tenchu 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins is the second game in the Tenchu series and is the spiritual prequel to the original game. It follows the journey of 3 ninjas, Rikimaru, Ayami, and Tatsumaru, as they fight against evil military forces. The goal of the game is to go through the missions undetected and kill the opponents using stealth tactics. The game's most praised feature is the inclusion of a mission editor, with which players could manually design missions and place enemies and objects as per their desire. Tenchu 2, Birth of the Stealth Assassins was met with generally positive reviews upon release. The feel of the game, the musical score, and fast yet stealthy pace was widely praised. The enemy artificial intelligence, especially its ability to detect the minor movements of the player, was considered a technical achievement. The game was a commercial success and led to the development of a sequel called Tenchu, Wrath of Heaven in 2003. Alundra, 1997. Alundra is a unique action-adventure type game that has broad elements of puzzle solving and combat. It follows the journey of the young protagonist Alundra, who has the special ability to enter other people's dreams. Armed with this ability, Alundra tries to help people who are having nightmares to the point of their death. The game deals with various adult, dark, existential, and even nihilistic themes. This game is considered the spiritual successor of the 1992 game Landstalker. Alundra received very favourable reviews upon its release. The handling of the subject matter and mature themes was immensely praised. The puzzles were deep and challenging. The musical score, especially the battle music, was very much suited to the tone of the game. The only point of debate was the graphical elements, which many critics thought could be better. Its innovative appeal ensured that it was a commercial success. A 3D sequel called Alundra 2 was released in 1999. Mega Man Rockman 1999. Mega Man Rockman is an action platform video game released in 1999 for the PS1 that's the first installment in the immensely popular and influential Mega Man franchise. The game takes the player on the journey of Mega Man, a humanoid robot, as he attempts to save the world from the malicious efforts of Dr. Wily, an evil scientist. Mega Man must fight and defeat 6 bosses before eventually squaring off against Dr. Wily, with the help of his creator and friend, Dr. Light, and his robotic dog sidekick. The formula of the boss battles in Mega Man is based on a rock-paper-scissors formula. Mega Man was a huge critical and moderate commercial success. The depth of gameplay, cute graphics, and catchy music won over a majority of gamers. The high difficulty level of the game was both praised and criticized. Mega Man won a lot of industry awards, including that of the Best Console Game of the Year. It sold less than 1 million copies worldwide and cemented the lofty position of the Mega Man franchise in the video gaming world. ISS Pro Evolution 1999. ISS Pro Evolution is a soccer football game that's the 3rd installment in the ISS Pro series. The number of players, teams, and venues has increased from previous installments. However, the teams are still unlicensed, meaning that the original name of the players can't be used and a misspelled version is used instead. There's also the introduction of club teams along with national teams. A new feature of this game is the introduction of a Master League, which is like a story career mode wherein 16 of the best European clubs compete for the title. The player receives upon winning and drawing, and these points can be used for player transfers across various clubs. The Master League is never-ending, and the player can keep on playing and transferring until he/she has the squad of their choice. ISS Pro Evolution was met with critical acclaim upon release. It was considered the best football soccer game of its time despite its licensing issues. The graphics, intuitive gameplay, and responsive opponent artificial intelligence were widely praised. ISS Pro Evolution is the spiritual predecessor of the Pro Evolution Soccer (PES) series that continues to this very day and is the main competitor to licensed soccer games like the FIFA series. Point Blank, 1997. Point Blank was initially an arcade game released in 1994 that was ported later onto the PS1 in 1997. The game uses attached gun hardware for pointing and shooting. The point of the game is to accurately shoot criminals, bullseyes and the like while avoiding other targets like civilians and bombs. There are various modes and stages based on accuracy, intelligence, memory, simulation, visual acuity, and speed. There's also a 2-player mode where 2 players can play the game simultaneously. Even before its PS1 release, Point Blank became an arcade cult classic in Japan and the US. The game was lauded for its graphics and playability. The 2-player and quest mode were especially highlighted for making the game durable and fun. The game was considered addictive and one of the best gun hardware games of all time. It also received commercial success and spawned various sequels on various consoles. Oddworld, Abe's Exodus, 1998. Oddworld, Abe's Exodus is a 2D platform-type game wherein the player controls Abe, who is on a journey to save his fellow species from an enemy plot to control and exploit them. The game has no definite user interface and the gameplay environment changes every time the player reaches the edge of the screen. The player can possess and control various characteristics in the game through various commands, depending upon the emotional state of the character to be controlled. One feature of this game that was immensely praised is the ability to save at any point during the game, which made gameplay much more enhanced. Oddworld, Abe's Exodus received very positive reviews upon release. The high-budget cinematics and cutscenes were heavily praised, as was the main character's depth and range of ability. The extent of the game's difficulty was liked by some and disliked by others. The game won several industry awards and sold quite well. A remake of the game called Oddworld Soulstorm was released in 2021 on various platforms. Future Cop LAPD, 1998. Future Cop LAPD is a third-person shooter game set in the future where the player controls the X-1 Alpha, which is simultaneously a combat robot and can transform into a fast, hovering spacecraft. The mission is to rid the streets of Los Angeles of criminal forces using advanced technology. Story mode features 12 levels with a boss fight at each end. The combat takes place on various maps, including heavily populated urban locations to sparsely populated villages. The player must keep the geography in mind and develop special tactics in order to smoothly play the game. There are powerful short-range weapons as well as long-range ballistic systems. Future Cop LAPD was a critical success. Some ports, like the PS version, had an online component, making it one of the earliest online arena games. Precinct Assault mode was especially praised. This was arena battle mode where each player starts with a base and has to capture other bases across the map. The 2-player head-to-head battle between 2 X-1 Alphas was also praised. The game, despite its critical success, didn't do very well commercially, and its studio was disbanded and incorporated into other studios as a result. Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix 2001. Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix is an action-adventure video game played from the third-person perspective. It's set in Hong Kong in the year 2048, where there's a global pandemic and there's crime all around. The story follows two female protagonists in their mission and effort to save the world. There are 4 playable characters at different points during the game. There are various forms of weapons available, but the game relies most on a puzzle-solving mechanic. There are 2 endings, one good and one bad, based on the player's ability to solve a certain critical puzzle. Fear Effect 2 Retro Helix received favorable reviews upon release. The bond between the principal characters as well as the 3D controls was widely praised. The difficulty in solving some of the puzzles drew both likes and dislikes among critics and gamers. A sequel was announced but then cancelled. This resulted in a wide-ranging crowdfunding campaign that ultimately led to the development of a true sequel called Fear Effect Sedna, released in 2016. A one-off comic book was also released and became quite popular. G. Darius, 1997. G. Darius is a horizontally scrolling shooting game. The background of the game is in 3D, while the gameplay is in 2D, thus making the game 2.5D. The player is in control of a particular spaceship called Silver Hawk. The player must capture or destroy enemy spaceships, as well as avoid obstacles to reach one of the 5 alternative endings of the game. There's also a dueling mode using laser beams, which is mostly used during boss fights. An upgraded version of the game with various improvements was released shortly after the successful release of the first version. G. Darius received quite favorable reviews upon release. The arcade version of the game also became very popular. It's been dubbed one of the greatest shooting games of all time in concept and gameplay. It's one of the cinematically best-looking space operas ever made. The only thing missing is a practice mode, which it could really use because the difficulty is quite high. An HD remaster called G. Darius HD was released in 2021. Luna Silver Star Story Complete, 1998. Luna Silver Star Story Complete chronicles the adventures of a young boy named Alex, who's chosen as the future Dragon Master and must prove himself worthy while fighting against a powerful nemesis. The game is a traditional 2-dimensional role-playing game and is actually the English remake of the very successful Japanese version, which was released in 1992. The successful English adaptation, as well as the use of movie-like animated sequences, has brought this version of the game much popularity and success. The game's engine and visual design would serve as inspiration to a lot of future games. Luna Silver Star Story Complete received quite positive reviews upon its release. The story, design and controls received a lot of positive feedback. The only point of negative criticism was the 2-dimensional nature of the graphics. This game has been called a historical masterpiece and is one of the defining games of the entire PS1 platform. The huge media push and success of the game led to the creation of several sequels as well as remakes. Warcraft 2 The Dark Saga, 1997. Warcraft 2 The Dark Saga is a real-time strategy game where every player makes all their moves simultaneously, unlike turn-based strategy games. This game is positioned as a war between human civilization and various types of aliens fighting for supremacy. Players must collect resources from natural sources and construct building and create units in order to advance their civilization and destroy opponents. The story mode contains dozens of missions, playing both as humans and aliens. The cinematic visuals and depth of gameplay are a defining characteristic of this and future Warcraft games. There's also a map editor allowing players to experiment and become creative. Warcraft 2 The Dark Saga was met with overwhelmingly positive reviews upon release. The strategic innovation and gameplay concepts were hailed as genre-defining. The game was deemed as well-balanced and all-round challenging. The game won a lot of industry awards and was seminal in making Warcraft one of the biggest game franchises of all time. Although the PS1 version lacked multiplayer mode, it'd be included in subsequent installments of the game. The game also did very well commercially, selling over 3 million units. Colin McRae Rally, 1998. Colin McRae Rally is a racing video game based on the 1998 World Rally Championship. The game features all the official cars and drivers that took part in the championship. The late Colin McRae was not only a playable character but also a technical consultant on the game. The races were held on various rally tracks across the world. There's a 2-player mode as well as a land-based mode allowing up to 8 players to compete with each other. The arcade game Sega Rally served as a strong influence in the development of this game. Colin McRae Rally was favorably received by critics as well as gamers. Critics praised the game as intense, thrilling, and realistic. The depth of gameplay as well as compelling graphics made the game very popular even among non-rally fans. The lack of a proper damage system on the cars was one point of criticism. The game also did very well commercially, selling over 4 million copies. After the death of McRae, the game was often restylized as Dirt Rally. Many sequels followed and are released to this very day. Mega Man 2 1999. Mega Man 2 is an action platform game that is the much anticipated sequel to the hugely popular game Mega Man. The player takes on the role of Mega Man, who, after defeating the evil scientist Dr. Wily, has to defeat him all over again since his return. Dr. Wily has created 8 new robotic bosses that Mega Man must defeat one by one, according to a rock-paper-scissors formula, before finally facing Dr. Wily in battle. After defeating each boss, Mega Man gains their signature weapon, which can be used to defeat a different boss. New additions to gameplay include health upgrades and the ability to save using a password system. Mega Man 2 was a huge success both commercially and critically. It sold over 1.5 million copies and is considered among the best Mega Man games ever made on any platform. The depth of gameplay and its addictiveness were highlighted. The cute and bright graphics and the very catchy soundtrack were also praised. The success and popularity of this game led to the release of multiple sequels in the future across many platforms. Nightmare Creatures, 1997. Nightmare Creatures is a gothic horror survival video game. The game merges real-life events with fictional elements in order to create a compelling horror story. The theme of the game is set against the backdrop of burning of the Parliament of London in 1834. The player must select one of 2 characters and save London from the clutches of experimental dark arts and evil forces. The player progresses through 16 levels of fighting creatures and characters that roam the city of London. There's a special adrenaline bar that mustn't be allowed to become empty or else the player would die. This bar is replenished by killing monsters and thus constantly forces the player to seek out combat. Nightmare Creatures received quite good reviews upon its release. The eerie atmosphere as well as the visual design was praised by both critics and gamers. The depth of gameplay and fast pace of the game were well appreciated. The complicated control system was the only major point of negative criticism. It was a commercial success, selling over 1.5 million copies. A film adaptation was planned, but ultimately didn't go into production. A sequel, Nightmare Creatures 2, was released in 2000. Gradius Gaiden, 1997. Gradius Gaiden is a horizontal scrolling shooting game wherein the player controls one of 4 battleships in order to prevent the bacteria army from demolishing the planet Gradius. It's the 4th installment in the Gradius franchise, which began in 1985. The objective is to shoot down and destroy enemy battleships while avoiding colliding with them or their weapon projectiles. Each of the 4 battleships has unique weapons and features. This is the first game in the Gradius series to include a 2-player gaming option. The word Gaiden in Japanese means side story, denoting the experimental approach of the team in making the game. Gradius Gaiden was a critical success. The visual design and graphical elements were heavily praised, as did the musical score and in-game sound effects. It was also deemed to be a well-balanced game in terms of difficulty. The core team's experimental design of the game paid off well in terms of innovation and acceptance. The game was also moderately commercially successful and led to the development of several sequels in the franchise. Grand Theft Auto 2, 1999. Grand Theft Auto 2 is an action-adventure game and the second installment in the Grand Theft Auto series, which has become one of the biggest and most influential franchises in the entire video gaming world. The player takes on the role of a criminal who must complete various missions given by criminal organizations in order to proceed in the game. The world is open to the player, who can steal cars, shoot people, set things on fire and gain general notoriety and points. This will attract the attention of the police, who will pursue the player and attempt to jail him. The player gains respect, loyalty and money throughout his journey, allowing him to do more things in the open world. Grand Theft Auto 2 was a moderate commercial success and was critically acclaimed. The graphics, gameplay and soundtrack were praised, as was the core game engine. Gamers in general had a lot of fun in completing missions and wreaking havoc in the open world. The complexities of the GTA world as well as the realism attracted a lot of praise. The popularity of the game led to multiple sequels, generating one of the most successful franchises in all of video gaming. Jet Moto 3, 1999. Jet Moto 3 is the final installment in the futuristic racing series Jet Moto. The player is in control of hoverbikes which float above the ground and can be driven over both land and water. Jet Moto 3 included new tracks that are meant for performing wild stunts, as the player can gain points and collect coins. There are also special techniques that have been included, like hopping, air braking, and power sliding, among others. The tracks varied greatly, ranging from volcanoes to forests and deserts. Jet Moto 3 received critical acclaim upon release. The visuals and fast pace of the game were praised by both critics and gamers. The depth of gameplay was commended and was described as addictive. The cutscenes were marginally criticized for being unreal. The game wasn't, however, a commercial success, despite critical acclaim. 2 sequels were planned that were subsequently cancelled for various reasons, including poor sales. Jet Moto 3 remains a standout futuristic fun racing game in the realm of the PS1. Speed Freaks, 1999. Speed Freaks is a kart racing video game with multiplayer option. The player controls one of 9 playable characters and races across tracks with various themes. There are various pickups available, which include invulnerability, speed boost, missiles, and slime. The player can use these to make oneself faster or to derail the opponent's race. The camera angle is from a third-person perspective. There are 3 single-player modes as well as 2 multiplayer modes. One multiplayer mode splits the screen and is a competition between 2 players, while the other supports up to 4 players and is of inferior visual quality. Speed Freaks received critical acclaim upon release and received moderate commercial success. This was chiefly because of its release clashing with that of many high-profile racing video games. The detailed visuals and sound effects of the game were praised. The core physics engine of the game was highlighted to have been nicely balanced between realistic and fun. The replayability factor of the game is considered its biggest strength. The game sold in the region of 200,000 copies. Doom. 1995. Doom is a first-person shooter game that has 3D background elements and 2D gameplay, making it a 2.5D game. Player is in control of an unnamed soldier who has to traverse levels in varied locations like Hell and the Moon. The enemies he has to shoot range from zombies to aliens. There are various weapons to choose from, ranging from a chainsaw to a rocket launcher. The player must keep in mind his or her health, ammunition, and armor as they play the game. There are various secret rooms and Easter eggs scattered all across the game. Doom is considered one of the most important games in video game history. It received huge critical and commercial success and defined the genre for shooting games. Doom has sold over 3.5 million copies. Critics praised the simplicity of the game, its gameplay, setting, and sound effects. The intensity and eeriness of the game were also commended. The success and popularity of Doom led to the creation of multiple remakes and sequels, the last of which is Doom Eternal, which released in 2020. Doom has won a multitude of awards, including Game of the Year from various organizations. Tenchu Stealth Assassins. 1998. Tenchu Stealth Assassins is a stealth-based video game and the first installment in the successful Tenchu series. The game follows one of 2 playable ninja characters in completing various missions during the Shogun era of Japan. The objective of the game is to remain undetected by either avoiding or silently killing enemy soldiers. There's a special meter called the Key meter, which helps monitor surroundings by letting the player know if the enemy has been alerted. The soundtrack of the game became very popular, as it was a mixture of various Asian musical styles including Chinese, Japanese, Thai, and Turkish. Tenchu Stealth Assassins achieved both critical and commercial success. It sold almost 1.5 million copies worldwide. Critics give Tenchu the credit for being one of the foremost games to establish the stealth genre in video gaming. The complicated and highly immersive gameplay was praised, while the difficulty was both liked and disliked depending upon taste. The success and popularity of this game led to the creation of several sequels in the future and established the importance of its creator game studio. MDK 1997. MDK is a third-person shooting game and stands for Murder, Death, and Kill. The game plays out the story of a simple janitor who must reluctantly save the world against an alien invasion along with his robotic dog sidekick. This game is unique because it uses software rendering as opposed to hardware rendering, thus making the game performance dependent on the CPU rather than the GPU, i.e. the graphics card. The game was quite striking visually because each level was chiefly designed by a different primary designer. In a special mode called the Sniper mode, the camera changed to first-person view and the player had the ability to zoom and shoot at 100 times the normal vision. MDK received critical and commercial acclaim. The gameplay and story were described as deep, immersive, and innovative. The only lasting criticism of the game was that it was short in length and not very difficult to complete. The game sold around 500,000 copies. A sequel and an animated series were immediately greenlighted, although the latter didn't pan out. MDK 2 was released in 2000. Return Fire 1996. Return Fire is a vehicle-based shooting game where the camera angle is from the 3D bird's eye point of view. The goal of the game is to capture the enemy's flag and return with it to one's base. It features a 2-player mode where players compete on a split screen. There are 4 playable vehicles, 9 different levels of play, and over 100 maps. The game stood out because of its unique concept and enjoyable gameplay, both single and multiplayer. The soundtrack of the game wasn't composed separately and is only composed of music that is available freely. Return Fire achieved critical as well as commercial success. The unique appeal of the game, the depth of gameplay, the classical soundtrack, and the variety of map was widely praised. There was an expansion pack of the game, Return Fire Maps of Death, that was again met with critical and commercial acclaim. The game is considered one of the definitive games of the PS1 platform. A sequel, Return Fire 2, was released in the year 1998. Mr. Driller, 1999. Mr. Driller is a puzzle game where the player must destroy colored blocks on the game screen by putting 4 or more of them together, causing a chain reaction. The player's oxygen tank is consistently depleting and must be refilled using air capsules scattered throughout the game. Although originally intended only for consoles, this game enjoyed a lot of success as an arcade game. A Apart from the normal mode, there's also a time-limited mode and a survival mode. The game was met with critical success and exceeded commercial expectations, especially for the arcade market. Its simple gameplay as well as catchy soundtrack won over a lot of critics. The game was lauded as being extremely fast-paced and addictive. The game was criticized for its lack of multiplayer mode and low amount of content. The success and popularity of the game led to a large number of sequels being produced. Syndicate Wars, 1997. Syndicate Wars is a real-time tactical and strategic game that takes place in a dystopian and cyberpunk future. The world is controlled by a mega-corporation called Eurocorps that controls the population through various mind-controlled chips. There's the existence of a rebel corporation called the Church of the New Epoch that seeks to free the citizens of this mind control and compete with Eurocorps for power. The player can play either as Eurocorps or the Church. Syndicate Wars did well both critically and commercially. Dark theme and depth of gameplay were praised. The isometric character of the game, as well as the difficult controls, didn't translate well onto the PS1. However, the 3D details were better on the latter. A sequel was planned but later cancelled. However, in 2015, through the help of a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, a spiritual successor of the game called Satellite Reign was released. Bloody Roar 2, 1999. Bloody Roar 2 is a kung fu-style martial arts fighting game consisting of anthropomorphic animals as players. There are a number of gameplay modes: story, arcade, training, survival, time attack, each with its separate appeal. The fighting is fast-paced, responsive, and visually gorgeous. The sound effects and musical tracks are suited to the gameplay and mood of battle. The number of available attacks per character has increased from the original game. Even if one hasn't played the original game, this one is addictive and has been compared to a lighter version of the immensely successful series Tekken. Bloody Roar 2 did quite well commercially and critically. Critics and players adored the visual elements of the game, the immersive gameplay, and the sheer speed at which the action happened. The sound effects and voice acting were also praised. The game has been described as well-balanced and addictive. The success and popularity of the game led to the development of multiple sequels, the first of which was Bloody Roar 3, which released in the year 2000. Silhouette Mirage, 1998. Silhouette Mirage is a 2D side-scrolling action game. The dynamics of one's attack depend upon which direction one is facing. There are two attributes, Silhouette and Mirage, and facing in a particular direction will either damage health or drain magic, depending upon the enemy. Particular bosses in the game are able to switch between Silhouette and Mirage. There are 7 different purchasable power-ups called Parasites. There are multiple endings to the game, depending on certain factors. There's a theme of genetic mutation playing throughout the game. Silhouette Mirage received positive reviews and sold well. The depth of gameplay and innovative game mechanics were praised. The North American version of the game was made considerably more difficult than the Japanese version. This divided some gamers who preferred the original version, which was also more fast-paced. Overall, the game did well both in Japan as well as North America. Team Buddies, 2000. Team Buddies is an action-based real-time strategy game. The game takes place in Buddy World, which was a peaceful place until there's an eclipse and various crates start falling from the sky. These crates contain weapons and vehicles, and thus the Buddy World enters into chaos and is segregated based on color. The goal of the game is to protect one's base while destroying the opponents. There are several Buddy types, each with different abilities. There are over 60 missions across 32 playgrounds in 8 separate areas. The game supports up to 4 players playing on split screens. Team Buddies received favorable critical and commercial response. Its dark humor and originality were widely appreciated. The bright visuals and pleasing sounds were also commended. It's considered one of the most unique games on the PS1 platform. Disruptor, 1996. Disruptor is a first-person shooter wherein the player takes training as a commanding officer for an organization called the Lightstormer Corps. The first few missions are based on getting used to your weapons, as well as using special psychic powers called psionic powers. The player must then face a variety of enemies, from terrorists to aliens, in order to protect the colonies of Earth, as well as abide by the orders of the president of the organization, who seems to have taken a liking to the player from unknown reasons. There are 5 psionic powers: shock, to electrically charge the enemy; drain, to damage the enemy; heal, to replenish health; blast, to create a highly damaging energy ball; and shield, to temporarily protect the player. These powers must be used in combination with typical shooting skills in order to navigate through the game. Disruptor received a lot of critical acclaim. The graphics and visuals were praised by most, but the excessive difficulty of the game was questioned. The game was favorably compared to the Doom series as well as Duke Nukem. The sound effects contributed to the immersive gameplay. Despite receiving good reviews, the game underperformed in sales and sold around 200,000 copies, which was much below the expectations of the developing studio. Wild 9, 1998. Wild 9 is an action and platform-type side-scrolling video game with a 3D backdrop but 2D gameplay, making it a 2.5D game. The player assumes the character of Wex Major, who has an electrical laser beam protruding from him that allows him to manipulate objects and enemies. Wex can pick up an enemy and smash it to death, throw it into a fire, or even use it as a shield. This ability can also be strategically like throwing an enemy onto spikes on the road, impaling it but creating a bridge for Wex to safely walk over. Wex ultimately meets 8 other individuals of his type and becomes their leader, this group being known as the Wild Nine. However, an evil force kidnaps them and it's up to Wex to save his friends. Wild Nine received favourable reviews and sold moderately well. The visuals and the humour of the game were generally praised, but the difficulty in completing the game was disliked by some reviewers. The versatile use of Wex's main laser weapon was described as innovative. The soundtrack and music of the game was particularly noted and liked, and was nominated for various industry sound awards. Ray Crisis 2000. Ray Crisis is a vertically scrolling shooting game that first became popular as an arcade game in 1998 and was later ported to the PS1 platform in 2000. The player fulfills the role of a virus, while the enemies are like antibodies inside a supercomputer-like organism. Ray Crisis serves as the sequel to the very popular Ray Force game and is the third installment in the Ray series. This game has been compared to games with the G. Darius and Einhander series. PS1 version of the game added a lot of customizable components that were not present in other ports of the game. Ray Crisis received average to good reviews and did well commercially. The game has been criticized for its incredibly short length and left gamers wanting more content. The game's visuals were praised and soundtrack was deemed enjoyable. A remastered HD version of all 3 Ray games, i.e. Ray Storm, Ray Crisis and Ray Force, will be released in March 2023. Vanark 1999. Vanark is a combat flight simulator game where the player controls a ship on an alien planet over 3D terrain. The player flies over a variety of terrain including volcanoes, oceans, jungles and canyons, all the while shooting from a wide range of guns, missiles as well as lasers. The levels are relatively long and hard, and there's a lack of health upgrades. This game has often been compared to, and sometimes unfavourably, Star Fox 64. The boss levels are incredibly well designed and quite challenging. Vanark received mixed to good reviews upon release and did satisfactorily from a commercial standpoint. The graphics were praised, as was the background music. The main point of criticism was the short duration of the game and lack of depth in gameplay. Critics and gamers, however, agreed it was a fun game to spend a couple of hours on. Star Ocean: The Second Story 1999. Star Ocean: The Second Story is an action role-playing game wherein the player is stranded in a jungle on a mysterious planet. His goal is to form a team and stop an evil organization spanning multiple worlds from coming into power. The player and his team can hunt down or flee from various enemies and use special abilities to maximize damage. The player can master various skills and create various objects. There's a special component of gameplay called Private Actions, through which the player can converse with his team members to increase or decrease their sympathies, thus affecting their performance during battle. This game has one of the largest number of possible endings in video game history. Star Ocean's Second Story was a critical and commercial success. It sold around 1.1 million copies worldwide. Critics praised depth and innovation of the gameplay elements as well as the replayability because of the various endings. The game led to the creation of a manga as well as an animated series. The success and popularity of the game led to multiple sequels, the last of which released in 2022. Madden NFL 2000, 1999. Madden NFL 2000 is a yearly American football video game equipped with innovative new features called the Play Editor and the Madden Challenge. The game contains the entire licensed NFL teams and players, as well as the usual game modes: Exhibition, Season, Create a Player, among a few others. It's the first NFL game wherein the player has hot and cold streaks. If a player is in a cold streak, he's particularly likely to fumble, and if in a hot streak, he's particularly likely to shine. This increases the level of judgment needed before passing the ball based on whether he's in a hot streak or cold streak. Play Editor lets the player create their own plays by assigning each player a particular command. The Madden challenges are a series of specific scenarios that are outlined for the player. In terms of graphics, the look is more or less the same, with improved frame rate and much more fluid animation. The audio department is very good, with super commentary from the legendary John Madden. The game was a critical and commercial success. It was the first Madden game to be released for both PC and Mac. The game was hailed as addictive and very fun to play. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino 1998. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino is a 3D strategy and puzzle-type video game where the player is in control of one of 5 human-like dominoes, which can be arranged such that they topple during a limited amount of time, all the while avoiding obstacles in their path. There are 6 stages, which are set up like race courses, such that the player will return to the starting point after every lap. The player can use as many laps as they desire to fulfill a certain stage. The game has been praised for its innovation and originality. It might not suit every player's taste, but a large portion of gamers will be hooked to this game. The game isn't very long in duration, which has been one of its lasting criticisms. The The controls were praised to be simple, however the lack of a saving mechanism was panned. There's no story per se, which reduces the replayability factor. Overall, it's considered one of the hidden gems on the PS1 platform. Puzzle Loop Ballistic, 1999. Puzzle Loop Ballistic is a puzzle-type game that initially became an extremely popular arcade game before finally being ported to the PS1 platform. In this Tetris-like tile-matching game, the player must place 3 similar balls next to each other, causing a chain reaction, leading them to clear and disappear from the screen. The game places the player at the center of the screen, shooting balls outwardly, and making them disappear such that the spiral string of balls doesn't snake around and reach the middle of the screen. There are 3 modes: Panic, where the game runs on endlessly; Checkmate, wherein the player gets a limited number of balls; and Time Limit, wherein a predetermined number of balls have to be cleared as fast as possible. Puzzle Loop did well commercially and received moderate approval from critics. The game was described as simple, innovative, but short. Its success led to the development of a sequel, Puzzle Loop 2, in 2001, which included a 2-player mode. The game inspired many clones of it to be developed on various platforms. Breath of Fire 4, 2000. Breath of Fire 4 is a traditional role-playing video game and the 4th installment in the popular Breath of Fire series, the last of which was released in 2016. The player follows the journey of a young man who has the ability to transform into dragons and must save the world from an evil, immortal force. The game has a 3D backdrop, but the gameplay is isometric and in 2D. Battle sequences take place in teams of 3 characters and are turn-based. This game reintroduces the Apprentice Master system, which allows players to learn and adopt different skills under the tutelage and guidance of various masters across the world. Breath of Fire 4 did well both critically and commercially. The visuals were praised, although sometimes the camera angles were considered problematic. The magic and combination systems were deemed well detailed. The sound, while not outstanding, was faithful to the tone of the game. A manga as well as a graphic novel was spun off from the main series. The success and popularity of the game led to the production of a sequel, Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, in 2002. Vigilante 8, Second Offense, 1999. Vigilante 8, Second Offense is the sequel to the popular and successful vehicular combat game Vigilante Offense. The game is set in an arena-like environment where the player is in control of a vehicle and must destroy all other competing vehicles with the help of weapons and upgrades gathered throughout the game. There's a story mode, quest mode, and arcade mode. The theme of the game involves time travel and climate change. The main weapon is a flamethrower with the capacity for performing special moves. Vigilante 8, Second Offense received favorable reviews, but only sold moderately well. The depth of gameplay and the dynamic engine of the game were praised. The soundtrack and multiplayer modes were also favorably received. The game was unfavorably compared to the Twisted Metal series. There was no true sequel to the game, but an HD remake was made in 2008. Roll Cage Stage 2, 2000. Roll Cage Stage 2 is a futuristic racing video game that is the successor to the popular and successful game Roll Cage. There are more than 20 cars that can be chosen from, 65 tracks to drive on, and 12 different game modes. The game is like a normal racing game, but the car can move in bizarre ways at very high speed, like upside down along ceilings or even sideways across rocks. The game's improved physics engine and its responsiveness make driving much more fun and better than its predecessor, and is much less prone to spinning around in circles. There are also weapons like gravity distortion devices, missiles, and the like. Roll Cage Stage 2 received average to favorable reviews and did moderately well commercially. The depth of gameplay and bizarreness of the game was praised, as were the controls. The engine was described to be much more fluid than its predecessor. The soundtrack wasn't particularly remarkable. It was favorable compared to Wipeout 3. A spiritual successor of the Roll Cage series was released called Grip Combat Racing after a successful Kickstarter campaign. Gex, 1995. Gex is the story of a human-like lizard who loves watching television and ends up getting sucked into the world of TV channels. It's a side-scrolling platform-type game. Gex must escape the media dimension and return home by defeating the ultimate bad boss, Rez, who wants to keep Gex entrapped in television world and make him a mascot. Gex must traverse across 24 stages across 5 TV channels. Gex's abilities match that of a real lizard. He can walk on ceilings and walls as well as run and jump. He can also use his tail in a number of offensive and defensive maneuvers. Gex was critically and commercially successful. The integration of a lizard's abilities into Gex was widely praised. The voice acting by comedian Dana Gould was also dubbed as a high point. The overall graphics and visual look of the game was favorable. The success of Gex spawned 2 sequels that released in 1998 and 1999. Real Bout Fatal Fury Special Dominated Mind, 1998. Real Bout Fatal Fury Special Dominated Mind was a special port to the PS1. It was quite successful as an arcade game before it was ever ported onto consoles. The game has more than 20 characters as well as the extra version of various special characters. The main focus is on the character of Alfred and his journey to dismantle a vast criminal empire. In addition to the game disc, there's a special fan disc that has interviews, artwork, and various inside elements of the game. Real Bout Fatal Fury Special Dominated Mind is an example example of the successful evolution of a port game from an arcade setting. The CGI scenes were of good quality, and the depth of gameplay was praised. Multiple sequels as well as a complication have been subsequently released. Anna Kournikova's Smash Court Tennis, Smash Court 2, 1998. Smash Court 2 is the second installment in the Smash Court series, and is a simple yet exciting tennis game that supports multiplayer up to 4 players. The game has an exhibition mode, a training mode, tournament mode, a street mode, and finally, a Smash mode. Smash mode is tennis played with explosive balls. There are also various unlockable characters from different games. Gameplay is arcade-like, but it's also realistic to some extent. Smash Court 2 has been praised for its simplicity, its cheerful graphics, and depth of gameplay. The opponent's artificial intelligence is adaptive and challenging. The music of the game is also upbeat. The game was successfully both critically and commercially. It continued the successful run of the Smash Court series. Micro Machines V3, 1999. Micro Machines V3 is a racing video game that uses a variety of tiny vehicles across miniature maps. Iconic levels include driving a big truck across a breakfast table or piloting a Formula 1 car through the terrain of a pool table. There's a variety of vehicles and a vast number of maps to choose from to ensure that the action doesn't get boring. There's also a multiplayer mode that supports up to 8 vehicles. The game was successful critically and commercially. Its detailed graphics, innovative concept, and smoothness of play were universally praised. The good controls and catchy soundtrack were also commended. The multiplayer mode drew criticism from a certain section of critics. The game became quite popular as a fun party game. The success and replayability of the game led to the creation of a sequel in 2006. Worms Armageddon, 1999. Worms Armageddon is a turn-based strategy game that's the third installment in the popular Worms franchise. Players control a team of at most 8 worms against other teams of worms using a vast variety of weapons and tactics. This installment includes a multiplayer mode as well as a map editor, both of which became extremely popular. Worms Armageddon became hugely popular both critically and commercially. It's considered one of the standout games on the PS1 platform. The cartoon-like graphics and twisted sense of humor of the game became instant hallmarks. The sophisticated engine and depth of gameplay also managed to hold gamers' attention for long periods of time. It won several industry awards for being the best strategy game of the year. Having achieved a cult status, the game receives updates and patches to this very day. NHL 2000, 1999. NHL 2000 is an ice hockey game from the very popular National Hockey League NHL franchise that continues to release games to this very day. The latest installment is NHL 23, which was released in 2022. NHL 2000 became quite popular among hardcore hockey fans as well as novices. This was attributed to the seamless fluidity of gameplay that was a good balance between realistic and arcade-like. A few bugs from the previous installments, like game clock issues, incorrect calculation of goalkeeper statistics, and others were patched in this version. There are a total of 28 licensed teams to play with. Another significant new feature is primitive multiplayer support that was instrumental in the game's success. NHL 2000 received both critical and commercial acclaim. The challenging and adaptive artificial intelligence and physics engine of the game were praised for their technical sophistication. The sound effects and commentary were sublime. The only major point of criticism was the excessive number of player injuries. This game also won a lot of industry awards for best sports game and set a benchmark for future games to be compared against. The Need for Speed, 1996. The Need for Speed, now known as Need for Speed, NFS, is an iconic racing game franchise that began with this title in 1996. It's one of the most successful video game franchises of all time. There are 8 sports cars to choose from and 6 courses. One of the hallmarks of this game and the entire franchise are police pursuits. This game also featured a very popular multiplayer option. The Need for Speed was a huge commercial success and received a lot of critical acclaim. Critics were impressed with the graphics, sound, as well as cutscenes. The level of technical realism in the game was hugely praised and set a benchmark for all racing games in the future. The physics engine, handling, damage system, and fluid, deep gameplay were widely appreciated. The artificial intelligence of opponent drivers was described as adaptive and challenging. This game also won a lot of industry awards for not only best sports game, but best game overall. It remains as one of the defining games on the PS1 platform. The overwhelming success led to the development of multiple sequels, the last of which was released in 2022. Goudelka, 1999. Goudelka is a survival horror role-playing game that takes place in the setting of a monastery, whereat the player must uncover dark secrets and battle terrifying monsters. The combat is turn-based, while the main themes of the game are explorative adventure and puzzle solving. There's a lot of extremely high-quality motion capture and CGI in the film that were the cutting-edge limit of technology of the time. Goudelka was critically praised, but only moderately successfully commercially. The graphics, cutscenes, and overall dark cinematic nature of the game were praised. The chief point of criticism criticism was the slow pace of the game. The game inspired the creation of a popular manga. A direct sequel was planned but was never realized. However, the game became the spiritual predecessor and inspiration of the popular Shadow Hearts series, which is set in the same universe as this game. Persona 2 Eternal Punishment 2000. Persona 2 Eternal Punishment is a horror action-based role-playing game that's the third installment in the popular Persona series. The player has to investigate the mystery of a curse that makes people's wishes come true, causing utter chaos and destruction. The game drew upon various themes in psychology and horror for inspiration. The developing team did a lot of research of supernatural phenomena, specifically tarot cards and incantations, spells. Persona 2 Eternal Punishment sold very successfully in Japan and the West. The game was deemed thrilling and genuinely scary at certain points. It also received modest critical acclaim. The visual effects and cinematics of the game were considered stunning. However, its slow pace bothered some gamers. The music was chilling and appropriate to the tone of the game. The success of the game led to the recognition of Persona franchise in the West. Marvelous Verdict. The release of the PlayStation was a landmark event for not just only video games, but human culture as a whole. Before it, video games were seen as a hobby and a mere way to pass time. But after it, people realized that video games were a serious endeavor, not just in terms of business or money, but also in terms of value. People could make a living making or playing video games. Video gaming thus became a sport like tennis or football. Esports was born. Through video games, people could affect the zeitgeist of the human civilization like any other art form like painting or movies. Video games thus became an art and a sport, something human beings absolutely love to do.